The Walt Disney Company has a complete stranglehold on the entertainment industry. Disney's near monopolistic grip on all things media has caused several discussions, ranging from things such as fewer job opportunities to stifled creativity to the homogenization of modern filmmaking. But throughout all of this, the Disney fandom has remained united. It has remained passionate as we cheer as our mouse overlord acquires all of these great intellectual properties and turns them into great movies. However, the Disney fandom has become divided recently due to a topic of discussion taking place within the larger film community, and that is the topic of the live action Disney remakes. This year sees the release of not one, not two, but four live action Disney remakes. So far, Dumbo, Aladdin, and The Lion King have all been released in theaters this year, and Maleficent Mistress of Evil is set to release this October. So, with these recent releases and several others over the past few years, many people have been clamoring for original Disney films rather than live action reimaginings of their classic animated works. So today we'll be taking a look at why Disney is choosing to go with this particular business model. To be clear, this video is not stating that the idea of these live action remakes is inherently good or inherently bad, but rather it serves as an examination as to why Disney is choosing to remake their classic animated films instead of producing new original work that I'm sure we all would welcome. Believe it or not, the idea of remakes is not a recent development within the studio. In fact, this practice has been happening on and off throughout Disney's history. The first Disney remake was 78 years ago when Walt Disney released a remake of Orphan's Benefit. The original was a black and white Mickey Mouse cartoon released in 1934. Due to the growing technological advancements in the medium of animation and the introduction of color in film, Disney decided to release a new and improved version of Orphan's Benefit, this time boasting beautiful Technicolor. Orphan's Benefit was essentially a shot for shot remake of the original. It even included the same soundtrack. Several parallels can be made between this remake of Orphan's Benefit and the recently released remake of The Lion King. Following Orphan's Benefit, Disney decided to focus primarily on original content for the next several decades. This is the period of Disney animation that we all know and love. The Golden Age, the Wartime Era, and the Silver Age. In fact, Disney produced almost no remakes or sequels until the 1980s in the midst of the Disney Dark Age. It was the 1990s, however, that was specifically full of remakes. Homeward Bound: The Incredible Journey was released in the 90s, which was a remake of the 1963 film The Incredible Journey. The 1990s also saw the release of remakes such as Flubber, The Absent-Minded Professor, That Darn Cat, and The Parent Trap. Yes, that one with Lindsay Lohan. The 1990s also gave us the first live-action remake of a classic animated Disney film with 1996's 101 Dalmatians. Although this remake was largely forgettable with the exception of Glenn Close's star performance as Cruella de Vil, it obviously marked a turning point for the studio because the idea of bringing their classic animated movies into the realm of live-action photorealism was an idea that inevitably stayed with them. The 1990s also saw Disney remake the classic UPA animated series Mr. Magoo into a live-action feature starring Leslie Nielsen in 1997. Despite not originally being a Disney property, this marked the first time that Disney made a live-action adaptation out of a pre-existing animated property. The 1990s was full of remakes for Disney, albeit it was full of remakes of their previous live action endeavors. However, the idea of remaking movies is nothing new to Disney. All you need to do is go through their history. What I've said is just a very, very brief Cliff Notes version of the remakes that they have done. The trend of Disney remaking live action films continued somewhat in the 2000s with films such as Freaky Friday, The Shaggy Dog, and a reboot of the Witch Mountain films in 2009. However, the live action Disney remakes, as we know them, began in earnest in 2010 with Tim Burton's live action adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. Upon first glance, Burton's Alice in Wonderland appears to be a live action remake of the animated Disney film. However, as the film progresses, it is revealed that this is actually a sequel to the original story. Whether or not it's a sequel to Disney's animated version or Lewis Carroll's children's books is up for interpretation. But perhaps the biggest takeaway from Tim Burton's live action adaptation of Alice in Wonderland is that it made money, grossing over $1 billion at the worldwide box office. 2010 also saw a sort of pseudo remake of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which was, again, kind of a remake of an animated short featured in Fantasia. The idea of bringing their classic animated films into the realm of live action was something that Disney could not resist. Ultimately, this proved to be a lucrative business idea. In 2014, Disney released Maleficent, a live action reimagining of Sleeping Beauty. Maleficent was not the Sleeping Beauty story that we know. Maleficent deviated from the Sleeping Beauty animated film very, very much. Maleficent chose to make the classic Disney villainess the protagonist of her own film and put her front and center. And the narrative essentially served as a rape revenge allegory. While the movie was not praised by critics, it was a hit at the box office, grossing over $700 million worldwide. Maleficent was also the topic of discussion. This movie prompted a lot of think pieces and analysis, and I mean a lot. Because again, the film primarily served as a rape revenge allegory, and just the very idea of making Maleficent a sympathetic character, giving her that sense of pathos, and then making the narrative what it is, caused a lot of people to talk about the movie. So even if it wasn't adored by the critics, it was very much a hit and it got people talking. The following year saw the remake of another classic princess story, Cinderella. Shakespearean actor and director Kenneth Branagh directed the film with Lily James starring in the titular role. This movie did a lot of things well. The visuals were beautiful, the music was great, and the performances were impressive. Instead of relying on nostalgia to sell it, Cinderella chose to expand on the story and actually made the narrative more focused. In fact, I would argue that Cinderella, the live action remake in 2015, even improves on certain characterizations, such as Lady Tremaine, who was fleshed out considerably in the live action version, and she was played to perfection by Cate Blanchett. So, Cinderella set the bar high, and a lot of people also accepted Lily James as their sort of live action Cinderella. This was, again, something that was kind of a turning point for Disney. Cinderella made money. It wasn't the biggest hit, but it made money, and it actually received pretty favorable reviews, if we're being honest. So, with Cinderella in the mind of the popular culture, the bar was set for live action Disney remakes. The bar was high. And in 2016, that bar was sent into the stratosphere because of Jon Favreau's live-action adaptation of The Jungle Book. 2016's The Jungle Book not only improved upon the 1967 animated classic, but arguably surpassed it. Jon Favreau's version of The Jungle Book is so much better than the animated version in every way. The plot was a lot more well-structured, And just generally, there was more of a plot because the animated one didn't necessarily have one. The characterizations were great and interesting. The vocal performances were absolutely perfect almost all across the board, and the visual effects were nothing short of innovative. The Jungle Book fell just short of $1 billion at the worldwide box office, grossing $966 million, but it did receive critical acclaim and it made a lot of money. With this, Disney could no longer ignore the idea that remaking their classic animated movies into live action remakes was a good idea because people liked them. The following years saw the remakes of several movies to varying degrees of success. Pete's Dragon, Sleeping Beauty, Christopher Robin, Dumbo, Aladdin, and The Lion King all received remakes over the past few years. Now, of course, you have a few outliers like Pete's Dragon, which is not so much a live action remake of an animated film because the original film was a hybrid film of live action and animation. And then you have something like Christopher Robin, which is not necessarily a complete remake either because it's more of a reimagining of the Winnie the Pooh mythology. However, it has become evident after seeing all of these remakes that the live action Disney remakes seem to fall into one of three categories. One, they are a shot for shot remake of the original animated version that results in an empty spectacle, such as Beauty and the Beast. Two, they remake the animated classic and actually improve upon that, such as The Jungle Book and Pete's Dragon. Or three, they completely reinvent the story, reinvent the characters, the mythology, all of it, such as Maleficent, and that looks to be the direction that Mulan is going in. However, the more recent remakes that we have received, such as Beauty and the Beast, Dumbo, and Aladdin, and especially The Lion King, have not taken this direction. What's happening? With Disney seemingly going through their back catalog and remaking all of their animated classics into live action reimaginings, there seems to be no end in sight because, hey, Cinderella was good and it avoided the shot for shot remake approach. The Jungle Book was excellent, so we're just going to keep doing it. What's happening? Well, honestly, there could be a few things contributing to Disney's creative choices here. The first of which being is, well, nostalgia is a good drug. I take it. I take it often. Disney knows that people are nostalgic. They know that people are nostalgic for their films. And you know who's really nostalgic? Kids who grew up in the 90s. We live in a world that is so divided and full of political hostility that we just want to get away. We want an experience where we can just escape from the cruel reality of the world and go back to that sense of childhood innocence that we felt watching a Disney movie. So Disney knows that there are certain moviegoers that will shell out the money to watch a new, prettier live action update of one of their favorite childhood movies. Second, you have to consider the overall direction that Hollywood is going in as a whole. Hollywood and its major studios are focused on franchise filmmaking. One only has to look at the movies that ruled the box office: Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Harry Potter, etc. This is a franchise and sequel business right now. So Disney is simply playing to those strengths because Disney owns a lot of good intellectual properties. So they are going with the trend of Hollywood. And that is an important thing to consider. The casual moviegoer is more likely to watch a movie based on an existing IP. Fewer and fewer people are going to the cinemas these days. So when they go for an event film. They want to feel rewarded. With the rise of VOD and various ways of consuming media, people have less and less of an incentive to go to the theaters now than ever. So when they do go, they want to feel rewarded. Like I said, when people go to the theaters, all of the evidence and market research suggests that people are more comfortable going to watch a movie based on an IP that they are already familiar with. Lastly, we have to consider that Disney's recent original films have not been doing so great critically or financially. Tomorrowland, A Wrinkle in Time, and The Nutcracker and the Four Realms were all disappointments. Tomorrowland was supposed to be the big auteur statement for director Brad Bird, the genius behind The Incredibles. Brad Bird, The Incredibles, and the movie didn't perform. A Wrinkle in Time was another movie, a huge, sprawling, ambitious adaptation from another very stylistic, high profile filmmaker in Ava DuVernay, and that disappointed. Granted, that is a hard book to adapt, but people didn't exactly show up to watch it. And The Nutcracker in the Four Realms, well, that was just a complete disappointment no matter which way you look at it. With no end in sight, the live action remakes look as if they're here to stay. But perhaps the worst thing about these live action remakes is that they cannot please everybody. There have been several criticisms leveled towards these live action remakes. Some people argue that Disney is doing a disservice to their original animated classics by making these soulless live action remakes. However, it is important to remember that even if some of the remakes do feel a little hollow, it does not erase the original work from existence. On the other hand, there are completely valid criticisms, such as the idea of these live action remakes undermines the value of the medium of animation. Animation is not a genre, it is a medium, and it should be respected. Animation is highly creative and expressive in a lot of ways that live action is not. Just because something is animated doesn't mean it's for children. So that is something that we need to consider. Is that what these live action remakes are for? Because if it is, that actually is kind of dangerous. Then you have some people saying, hey, these live action remakes are fine. They are introducing these classic stories to a whole new generation of children. Which again, I would say this is fairly valid. This is a fairly valid argument because you do have to consider that there is an entire generation of kids that has not seen these movies. They have not seen all of these wonderful Disney films. It is unfair to assume that parents are collecting these animated Disney classics for their children to watch someday. Not everybody is me, and that's totally fine. Another criticism is that, well, some people argue that the remakes deviate too much from the animated version and they thus lose the heart and the soul of the movie. And this causes some sort of fan backlash, resulting in fans clamoring for things like music included in the films and supporting characters, mostly of the talking animal sidekick variety. For example, Mulan looks to be a complete reinvention of that story. It looks like an actual remake of Mulan rather than a shot-for-shot remake of the animated version. However, despite how impressive it looked, there has been some pushback from fans expressing their disappointment at the exclusion of characters like Li Shang and Mushu, and expressing their disappointment over the fact that there is not going to be any music in the film. So what are we supposed to do? Because you can't please everybody with these movies. Now, again, less and less people are going to the theater, and it is unfair to assume that people can go to the theater several times a year, much less several times a month. But one of the problems that I have with these live action Disney remakes is that some of them seem to exist solely for the purpose of fixing plot holes that were never really plot holes, or fixing problems that only pedantic nerds would care about because they're just complete nitpicks. For example, Beauty and the Beast is about Stockholm Syndrome. That's what everybody said, even though Stockholm Syndrome is not an actual psychiatric diagnosis according to the DSM-5. It is not a real thing. So I don't know why that's even an argument. So the live action remake of Beauty and the Beast, it seemed to address that whole problem by fleshing out Belle and Beast's relationship, making it seem more likely that these two would fall in love. Now, of course, yes, some of the older animated Disney films have some questionable references and some things that are just not necessarily favorable. And granted, I'm not going to say those Disney films were a product of their time because we are a more progressive society now. But what I am saying is, I don't think Disney needs to remake all of their animated films solely for the sake of fixing the things that didn't work at the time. What does everybody want? Do we want fresh, new, inventive takes on the classic stories that we all grew up with? Or do we want updated, prettier versions that are essentially the exact same movies we watched as children? Well, much like the very existence of these live action Disney remakes, that is a very loaded question. It is a multifaceted question that requires some analysis. But I do know this: until Disney loses an incentive to continue making these live action remakes, they will continue to make them. The audience is the one who determines what kind of films Disney is going to make. And what I mean by this is, right now, audiences are showing up for the event films. They're showing up for the reboots, the sequels, the franchises. Until audiences show Disney and Hollywood as a whole that they are no longer interested in franchise filmmaking, reboots, never-ending sequels, cinematic universes, shared continuity. These kind of things are going to continue to happen in the filmmaking industry. So until audiences decide that is not what they want to watch anymore, it will continue to happen. Until we stop going to watch these, Disney will make them. So if you are someone who does not like these movies, then maybe you should consider not watching them. And I'm not encouraging you to stop watching Disney movies. I would never do that. But what I am saying is that if you have a problem with these movies existing, why contribute to their continued existence? On the other hand, if you love these movies, then you should go see them. I go see them. I like to see these classic stories brought to life. It's not always great, but I enjoy seeing it. So look, all I know is that at the end of the day, the live action Disney remakes will continue to be hotly debated until they either stop or until they decide that these remakes need to be true remakes, or they completely reinvent the wheel with these movies. But regardless of what the future holds, all I know is that I am looking forward to whatever Disney does in the future, whether that be live action remakes or new animated films, preferably hand-drawn 2D animation. But I would like to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like. It doesn't cost you anything except maybe a couple seconds of your time. Subscribe, and welcome back to the channel, guys. Once again, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy what I had to say, what I discussed here today, subscribe, because we're all just shilling out here. So yeah, I'm gonna go pick up my paycheck from Disney now, and you guys can go do whatever it is you want to do. Oh, and by the way, if you want to tell me how wrong I am, go ahead and comment, because that is well within your right to tell me that I am wrong. Thank you.